All right, folks, here we go. It is time for Stud Stories. We've got the Tennessee Stud. All we need is the story. And now, the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, tell us what's happening in the Great Smoky Mountains. And what is the story?
Oh man, the mountains are fine today. Beautiful day here, man. And the story is going to be a great one. It comes from the original first studcast, the number 3, and which was about Roy and his bear named Ginger.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about the bear and Ginger. And I think she's one of the first wrestling bears in the history of the sport. The internet doesn't, the internet's back and forth, or here, there, and everywhere. They don't even mention Ginger. And I'm not surprised because Roy never made a point of trying to get his name out there and make a big name for himself. I think he's gotten looked over, and I found that that's happened quite a bit with my family. We didn't want much publicity, and we didn't get much publicity. So I think we're going to talk today about Roy's bear Ginger, and I want to start this off today, Dave. I know when I did this first one, it was the third studcast that I ever did, and I wasn't doing a whole lot of research on some of it back in those days. I was just basically telling stories, and I told the story about the way Roy got the bear was he actually bought Ginger when she was a small bear, when she was a cub, basically. But since I did that show, which is, now that's number 3, and we're on number 232. So, that's 4 years ago that
Okay.
I told this one that I did this the studcast originally about Ginger and Roy.
Right.
So, and the way I told it was that he had purchased the bear. But since that time, I talked to Roy Lee. I had a conversation with my cousin Roy Lee, whose dad is Lester. That's my grandfather's Roy's youngest brother. He's about 20 years younger than Roy. But Lester knew a whole lot more about the bear than I did. So I found out from the story that Roy told me that Lester told him how Roy got the bear, and it's a pretty darn good story, man. I mean, it actually makes it a more wonderful thing of the way he got introduced to the bear. And what happened is he used to make these trips back in the 30s. This was started in around 1930 that he gets hooked up with the bear. And he's making these trips all over the South and the Southeast and all into way as far north as West Virginia. And when you go into West Virginia, man, it's all mountainous country. A lot of bears up there for sure. And he had a trip he was on, one of his trips up there into West Virginia, and he happened to be by himself. He would drive from Dyersburg, Tennessee on 2-lane roads to Bluefield, West Virginia. 13 hours.
Wow.
2-lane roads.
Yeah.
13 hours back.
God. Yeah.
Okay. And coming out of West Virginia on the 2-lane road, he came upon a bear that had been hit by a car.
Oh no!
And she was a big bear, and she had one cub, and he had to stop because whoever had hit her had killed the bear. The mama was dead, and the cub was staying right there with the mama, of course, and having a fit, as you could imagine. And Roy just, he felt like. He told Lester that, once he saw the bear and what the situation was with the cub being there, and the bear's laying in the middle of the highway, the cub's going to stay with his mama, and the cub's going to get hit too.
Yeah.
So he put the bear in the trunk of his car. Okay, because he had a friend in Dyersburg. He lived in Dyersburg, Tennessee, which is on the west side of Tennessee, not far from the Mississippi River. And he took the little cub home with him to Dyersburg because he had a veterinarian that lived not too far down the road from him, and he figured he could take her to the vet and get her to handle one way or another. And so when he takes her to the vet, as Lester told the story to Roy, Roy told it to me. Then the vet says, well, he couldn't keep the bear, and he didn't know what to do with the bear. And Roy was a pretty decent guy. He treated animals a lot better than he treated people. To be honest with you, that was kind of Roy's style.
All right.
But he decided that he would raise the bear. He'd keep the bear. So he built her cage, and he raised her. Now this was about in the late 1930s, and there was no wrestling bears in the country back in those days. And so after a while, I think Roy in the World War II gets started. And, it's not a good time to be in the wrestling business for sure, because all of the men in the country are off to war. And you got the women that are, trying to help in the war effort and all that stuff. So it was really not a big time to be in wrestling, not a great time to be a wrestler and in wrestling. He's too old to be in the war. But so he gets this idea that he's going to train this bear to wrestle. He's not doing any wrestling himself, nor is Herb, his brother, and a lot of the other wrestlers that he knew. So he starts training this bear. So he spends about 2 years training Ginger. He calls her Ginger. She's a female bear. And he never takes out her teeth, and he never takes out her claws, which bears after her. She's probably the only bear in the history of all the wrestling bears that had her teeth and her claws. And so because he had raised her from the time she was a baby cub, obviously he was his mom. He was her mother.
Right.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the bear is just really close to him. He feeds her. He does everything for her. And then he gets crazy about his bear. He really loved this bear, and I knew that because Lester and Roy actually told me stories about how he felt about his bear. So anyway, in the late 1930s, he spends a couple of years training his bear, and when she's 2 years old, she's grown from being a 75-pound cub to an 800-pound black bear. She's a big girl, right? And so he decides that he needs to take her, and he needs to start using her on the road. He's trained her, and he can't wrestle in his own towns because of the war. So he builds her a trailer, and he puts her in the trailer, and he takes her on a tour of North America. 1940, 41, 42. For 3 years, he doesn't come back to Tennessee. And he goes into Mexico, as far south as Mexico City. He takes her up the West Coast, into Canada. He crosses Canada with her. He spends 3 years on the road. And he tell me in the stories, that he, I said, how did you do? I mean, how did you draw? And he goes, we never went anywhere. He didn't sell out. And he said there were other promoters still trying to promote. Mexico wasn't in the war, so they had their people were still there. So he spent a lot of time in Mexico. And he says that the promoters loved his bear. And because he said we never failed to sell out. Every time she wrestled, and wherever it was, the building was so totally packed.
All right,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ron. I'm curious because now he's taking the bear on tour, so the bear's not being hidden. He's being shown to everybody. Where does the Department of Fish and Game come in? Was there ever an encounter? Did the wildlife personnel ever say, "Hey, look, the deal with the bear"? Did they ever make any sort of declaration about this bear?
No, I mean, think about it. There was no other wrestling bears. Never been a wrestling bear. So I mean,
Right.
You start carrying around a bear. I mean, when times were different back in those days.
Well,
Hell,
yeah,
they had World
yeah.
War II going on.
Yeah.
What are they going to be worried about a bear? Whether a bear's being taken care of properly?
I mean, I can see the times were definitely different, but nowadays, I doubt you could do this. But anyway, But
Oh no, there's no way you could do this
right,
nowadays.
right,
No,
right. Okay.
no, but back in the beginning of World War II and during the
Yeah,
early days of World War II, geez, everybody wanted to see this. This is a unique event, and
yeah,
what he did is he had to wrestle her himself
right.
because she had all of her teeth and
Yeah,
she had her claws.
yeah.
So he could wrestle her without her having a muzzle on
And
and
he
without
was,
putting mittens on her feet.
yeah, and he was taking care of the bear, or else I'm pretty sure somebody would have said, "Hey, he's mistreating the bear." So,
Oh, of course they would have.
yeah,
He would have had a problem. And gosh, he treated her better than, like I said, he treated her better than he treated people.
right, okay,
So she had the best food, and she had tremendous care.
yeah,
So so he's traveling his bear for 3 years all over North America. It's a
right,
North American tour, I guess you could easily call it.
yeah,
From the west coast of Canada all the way across Canada to the Maritimes, to the eastern side of the country, and then all through the United States. So he's gone 3 years with the bear, and she's a remarkable man. And I asked him, I said, you know, how did you control her? I mean, she's a bear. I mean, what do you do to make a bear mind you?
yeah, right,
So, and he had a good sense of humor, and lots of times I could never tell whether he was just yanking my leg or what,
mm-hmm,
but he
mm-hmm.
said I would slap her.
Oh,
And I would go, so that I went, wait a minute, I used to call him Papa. I was like, wait a minute, Papa. Here goes bears slap men.
yeah,
Men don't slap bears.
yeah,
And he said, no, I slapped my bear. He said, if she did something I didn't like, he said I had to keep her in line.
yeah,
So, he had to keep her under control. And, so as time went on, he started letting other people wrestle her.
mm-hmm.
He wrestled her this entire tour. And he would, every time, in order to be able to wrestle her, he had a collar around her neck, and they would snap on two long ropes off of each side. He put a guy on the outside of the ring on opposite sides of the ring to control her, to keep her from leaving the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
You don't want your bear out in the crowd.
No, not really. Just wandering around in the crowd.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's not one of
yeah,
those deals.
yeah.
And so he with his the show that he did with his bear, and then he taught her bears were natural wrestlers. I mean, they could do flying mares. They would get you if you got behind them. They'd reach back and get you by the back of the head and flip you over in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
They'd do a monkey flip if you charged them and you got them to roll onto their back. They'd put their feet underneath your hips and flip you in the air. And he had a great little show there.
Mm-hmm.
And at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the show, he used to bring out a Coke bottle, and that was her prize for doing a great job. And she would sit up on her butt, and she would put the Coke bottle up to her mouth, and she would drink that Coke. And that's the way every match ended with, and the fans all really clapping for her.
Uh-huh.
What he did is he took a 3-year period of time in which he might have starved as a wrestler, and he figured a way to make a bunch of money
Mm-hmm.
instead. So, and then when he brought his bear back, and he started using her then in his own territory. War gets over, and boy, she was a sensation, obviously, and she sold out everywhere he ever took her in his own monster territory, which was basically from Ohio to the Gulf of Mexico. So he had plenty of towns and plenty of places to take her, but he would drive guys crazy. Wrestlers were horrified of her because she didn't have a muzzle on most of the time,
Hmm.
and she had the real claws. And if she got a hold of you, she could tear you up. Basically,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
she might kill you, right?
Yeah.
And he would take her in dressing rooms without sometimes her muzzle or her mittens on. And gosh, guys would just be horrified of her. And then he had a couple of guys in particular. One guy named George Harris They called him the baby blimp. He was about a 300-pounder, weighed probably about 5'8", and very fat. And he was just really horrified of the bear. And Roy would do horrible things to him. Like Roy told me one time he took Ginger in, she was wrestling in Birmingham in the Boutwell Auditoriums, early days, that old auditorium there in the 40s. And it's about 4 stories high. That has dressing rooms in the back of the building. And they're about 4 stories up, some of those dressing rooms. And he said one time he took her in the dressing room with him. He went up on the 3rd floor, he said, and there was Bunk Harris there, the baby blimp.
Oh.
He says all he had, he said she didn't have a muzzle on and she didn't have any mittens on. And all she had on was he had a little rope connected to the collar around her neck.
Mm-hmm.
And he said Bunk was at the far end of the hallway, a bunch of dressing rooms, but maybe 4 or 5 dressing rooms all the way to the end of the hallway. And then there's a little room back there that they used, I guess, for cleaning up. You know, they had the stock room where you go and, just a little tiny room that had glass door in the front of it. And out the backside was a window, but you're 4 floors up. And he says he got onto the hallway and he's down at one end of the hallway and Bunk's at the other end of the hallway, and he sees him. And he says right away, he says he just reached over and he unhooked her.
Uh-oh.
and he said Bunk screamed, and when he screamed, it made her, it excited her. And she went for him. She went running down the hallway.
Wow.
And he goes into the door. He goes into the little storage room. And he's in there screaming, "Oh, God, Roy, get her, get her, get her." So she comes to the door, and she can't get through the door, but it's got glass panels in it. And she runs her hand through, her paw through one of those panels, and she's reaching in there for him, right? She gets up there real close, and he's screaming and screaming and screaming. And then so Roy says it gets quiet. And he goes, "Oh, God, man." He got to thinking, then he goes, "Wow, that there's a window there, and it's 4 floors up. Maybe surely God, he didn't jump out the window." And he says he opened up the door, he snapped her, he got control of her, and he opened up the door, and he said Bunk had both legs out the window, and he's sitting on the ledge and ready to take the jump, man. So he did. And then they had another story about Bunk where he went into another time he was in a town, and Bunk was in a bathroom area. And it had 2 stalls in it, and like a partition between the stalls, and a little area up at the top. Maybe it was about 2 feet wide between the top of the partition and the ceiling. And he said, and Dad was with him on this one. And Dad actually saw him, and he said that Bunk was in the bathroom, and Roy realized he was in there, and he had the bear. And she didn't have on any muzzle, no claw, no mittens on her at this point. And he says he took the bear and he opened the bathroom door, and Bunk is in the stall there in the bathroom. And he sticks his head out and he sees the bear. Roy just kind of brings her right into the room, and he unsnaps her, and it's at night, and he turns off the light and closes the door. That wouldn't be funny for most people, not a funny thing for Bunk, for sure. And Dad says he hears him screaming. Oh, he's screaming in there. "Oh, God. Oh." And then it gets real quiet, and he goes, "Geez," Dad goes to Roy, he goes, "Hey, geez, don't you think Matt ought to check on him, man? She might have got him or whatever, And so Roy kind of reaches in and he flips the light on. And they look into the stall, and there's no Bunk. There's no Bunk in the bathroom anymore. There's no place he could have gone. And then they hear something up above by the ceiling. They hear this somebody trying to suck wind, right? And then Bunk had somehow squeezed his huge fat body in that little 2-foot space between the top of the wall, between the ceiling and that partition. And he said that it took 3 guys to pull him out of there. He was stuck in there. So that's kind of it's a little story for folks that can't imagine what a bear would be like. I'm going to tell another one about this one. There's a second part to this story that is really pretty fascinating and pretty horrifying at the same time. The next one I'm going to tell, the next stud stories that has to do with the bear. It'll be Ginger Part 2. Is going to be about her getting actually a hold of my dad, and darn near killing him, man.
Wow.
I wouldn't be here and wouldn't be doing this stud story today if that had happened. But luckily, Roy was there, and that's what the next one is going to be about. We're going to talk about not a humorous side of it, but the really dangerous side of having a bear in your backyard.
Hey, I got to ask you this because you've told this before, and correct me if I'm wrong. Did you not also have an encounter with Ginger the bear?
Well, I never had a bad situation. I wrestled a bear. My dad and I wrestled a bear together in Morristown, Tennessee.
Okay.
But no, I never had a problem with the bear, and I never saw that bear because she was, she didn't live to be old enough for me to actually ever see her wrestle. Even.
So maybe it was your dad. Was it in the backyard? That's
it.
That's your dad. That is the
That's
story.
I'm going to tell the story of Ginger actually getting her hands or her mittens in her mouth and darn near killing my dad when he was 12 years old.
And then it seemed like you had quite a few young friends that were there with you in the backyard when.
He did.
Okay,
yep.
Right, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that next one, we're going to do that next. The next one I'm going to do that'll be about a bear would be Ginger number 2, and I'm going to tell that story about how I'm lucky to even be here. Because my dad was lucky to be here, and I wouldn't have been here if that bear had another 30 seconds with just her and him. There would have been no me.